The blood on Maya Rodriguez's scrubs had dried to a rust-brown stain that stretched from her left shoulder to her hip, a grotesque abstract painting created by 12 hours of trauma, chaos, and a healthcare system held together by duct tape and the stubborn refusal of nurses like her to let patients die on their watch. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Friday evening at Metro General Hospital in Detroit, and Maya should have been in her car by now, driving home to Sarah and whatever remained of the dinner that had been waiting since 7 a.m. Instead, she stood in the supply closet, pressing her forehead against the cool metal shelving, trying to summon the energy to move her legs one more time. The ER beyond the closet door sounded like a war zone. Gunshot victims from a drive-by shooting on 8 Mile, a multi-car pileup on I-75 that had sent 7 people to trauma. The usual Friday night cocktail of overdoses, domestic violence calls, and desperation that made Detroit's emergency rooms feel like the front lines of society's breakdown. Maya, charge nurse. Patricia Wong's voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel. I need you. Maya closed her eyes and counted to 5. She'd already worked 4 consecutive 12-hour shifts this week because Metro General was hemorrhaging staff faster than a trauma patient with a severed artery. 2 nurses had quit last month, burned out, fed up, and tired of being asked to perform miracles with impossible caseloads. Hospital administration claimed they couldn't afford replacements, citing budget constraints, while CEO Marcus Webb had just purchased his 3rd vacation home in the Bahamas. She pushed through the supply closet door and found Patricia standing beside bed 12, where an elderly black man was clutching his chest and gasping for air. Mr. Henderson, cardiac history, waited 4 hours just to get a bed, Patricia said, her voice tight with exhaustion and frustration. Jenny called in sick again. Marcus is covering NICU, and we've got 3 more ambulances en route. Maya looked around the department. Every bed was full. Patients were lined up on gurneys in the hallways, and the waiting room looked like a refugee camp. In bed 3, a homeless veteran was having a seizure while his service dog whined helplessly beside the stretcher. Bed 7 held a teenage girl with track marks on her arms and foam around her mouth, another overdose in a city drowning in fentanyl. How long? Maya asked, already knowing she couldn't walk away from this chaos. Just until morning. Maybe noon if the day shift actually shows up. Maya felt the weight of her student loan payments pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. At $1,847 a month, she couldn't afford to turn down overtime, no matter how exhausted she was. She thought of Sarah waiting at home, probably asleep on the couch by now, with Netflix still playing. She thought of her own exhaustion, of the mistakes she was bound to make if she kept pushing herself past human limits. Then she looked at Mr. Henderson's gray-tinged lips and made the only choice she could live with. Fine. But I want hazard pay rate, not overtime. Patricia winced, like Maya had just asked her to donate a kidney. You know administration won't approve. Then maybe administration should come down here and explain to Mr. Henderson why there's nobody qualified to give him his cardiac medication on time. 20 minutes later, hospital administrator Richard Vaughn stormed into the ER like an expensive suit with anger management issues. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the linoleum floor, completely out of place among the blood, vomit, and human suffering that defined Maya's world. Miss Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from corner offices and quarterly profit reports. I understand you're demanding hazard pay for what amounts to voluntary overtime. Maya didn't look up from starting an IV on a car accident victim whose arm was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. I'm demanding fair compensation for preventing people from dying because this hospital won't hire enough staff to meet basic safety standards. Your contract clearly states, my contract states I'm responsible for 6 patients maximum. Maya finally looked at him, her dark eyes flashing with exhaustion and barely contained rage. I currently have 12 patients under my direct care, 3 more waiting for beds, and a waiting room full of people who've been here so long they're considering establishing permanent residence. Vaughn's face reddened like a thermometer hitting dangerous levels. Your attitude is exactly the kind of, either approve the hazard pay, Maya interrupted, her voice low and deadly calm, or go explain to the families in that waiting room why their loved ones aren't receiving the medical care they deserve because you're too cheap to hire adequate staff. The silence that followed was broken only by the beeping of monitors and the distant sound of an ambulance siren growing louder as it approached the hospital. Vaughn turned and walked away without another word, his expensive shoes clicking a retreat. Maya didn't know it yet, but she'd just declared war on a system that crushed people like her for sport. What she also didn't know was that this moment, this choice to fight for her patients instead of protecting herself, would define the next 72 hours of her life and change everything. By midnight, what had started as a typically chaotic Friday night had devolved into something resembling a medical disaster movie, except the cameras weren't rolling, and there was no heroic soundtrack to make the suffering feel noble. Maya was running on her 13th hour with no break, surviving on vending machine coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with the tears of previous shift workers. The apartment building fire on the east side had sent 23 victims to their ER, including 7 children with smoke inhalation and burns that made Maya's hands shake as she started their IVs. The hospital's ancient computer system, a relic from the early 2000s that administration refused to upgrade because it still works, had crashed spectacularly around 11 p.m., leaving them with paper charts and manual medication tracking. Maya was now essentially playing the role of air traffic controller for human misery, coordinating between overwhelmed doctors, terrified families, and a nursing staff that was held together by determination and pharmaceutical-grade caffeine. "Maya, I need you to check my dosage calculation," called Dr. Kevin Harrison, a second-year resident who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 5 hours. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, his scrubs were stained with various bodily fluids, and his hands were shaking as he prepared a syringe for 6-year-old Lily Parker, one of the fire victims. Maya glanced at his calculation sheet and her blood went cold. "Doctor, this is 10 times the correct morphine dose. This would stop her breathing within minutes." Harrison's face flushed red. "I don't need a nurse telling me how to practice medicine. I've been doing this longer than you've been practicing medicine for 8 months, Maya interrupted, pulling the syringe from his hands. "I've been keeping people alive for 7 years. This dose would kill this child." The confrontation was witnessed by several other staff members, including Dr. Elizabeth Chen, an attending physician who had been watching Maya work with growing interest. Dr. www. Chen quietly took note of this interaction. It wouldn't be the last time Maya's clinical expertise would clash with medical hierarchy and bruised egos. Harrison stormed away, muttering something about uppity nurses, but Maya was already recalculating the proper dose and preparing a new syringe. Lily Parker would live to see morning, because a nurse who'd been on her feet for 13 hours was more alert than a doctor who couldn't handle his pride being wounded. At 3 a.m., Maya's night took another turn toward the surreal when officers Mike Torres and Jenny Davidson brought in Derek Williams, a 23-year-old black man they claimed had been resisting arrest and acting erratically. Derek was handcuffed to the gurney, conscious but with obvious head trauma, a dislocated shoulder that made Maya wince just looking at it, and what appeared to be at least one broken rib based on his labored breathing. "He's faking it," Officer Torres announced with the confidence of someone who had never spent a day in medical school. "Dude was high as a kite, tried to steal a car. Just patch him up so we can book him." Maya began her assessment, noting Derek's rapid breathing, fruity-smelling breath, and disorientation. His medical bracelet indicated he was diabetic, and when she checked his blood sugar, her worst fears were confirmed. His glucose was over 400, indicating diabetic ketoacidosis, a potentially fatal condition. "Officer Torres, this man wasn't high on drugs," Maya said, starting an insulin drip with practiced efficiency. "He was having a diabetic emergency. His blood sugar is dangerously high, which would cause confusion, disorientation, and what you probably interpreted as erratic behavior." Torres stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're not a doctor, nurse. Just do what you're told and keep your opinions to yourself. My opinion is based on blood work that shows 0 illegal substances in his system and glucose levels that could have killed him if you hadn't brought him in when you did." Dr. Chen arrived and quickly confirmed Maya's assessment, ordering additional tests and treatments that would stabilize Derek's condition. But the damage was done. Torres made it clear he would be filing a complaint about Maya's interference with police business and her attitude problem. As the first rays of Saturday morning sun began filtering through the ER windows, Maya realized she'd been on her feet for over 20 hours. Her body was running on pure adrenaline and stubbornness, but her mind was still sharp enough to recognize the impossible situation she was in. The day shift was supposed to arrive at 7 a.m., but only half of the scheduled nurses showed up. The others had called in sick or simply didn't show, leaving the department critically understaffed once again. Patricia approached Maya with tears in her eyes, actual tears from a woman who had been running emergency departments for 15 years and had seen every kind of human tragedy imaginable. "Maya, I know this is insane, but I need you to stay until at least 6 p.m., maybe longer if we can't get agency nurses." Maya looked around the ER. 15 patients were still waiting to be seen, including an elderly man who'd been having chest pain for 6 hours and was starting to look gray around the edges. The overnight attending physician had just left, leaving only Dr. Chen and the exhausted Dr. Harrison to handle the medical decisions. This is unsafe, Patricia. For the patients and for us. I'm going to start making mistakes if I keep going. I know, but what choice do we have? Maya thought of Sarah, who had stopped texting around 2 a.m., probably assuming Maya had found a corner somewhere to sleep. She thought of her own physical limitations, of the fact that her hands were beginning to tremble from exhaustion and caffeine overload. But then she looked at bed 8, where Derek Williams was finally stable, his blood sugar normalized, his shoulder properly set. Without her advocacy, he'd likely be in a jail cell instead of getting the medical care that had probably saved his life. Fine, she said quietly. But I'm documenting everything. Every understaffed hour, every delayed medication, every patient who waits too long for care, and I'm sending copies to the state health department. This decision to continue working while simultaneously building a case against the hospital's unsafe practices marked a turning point. Maya wasn't just enduring the system anymore. She was preparing to fight it. As she began her second consecutive 12-hour shift, Dr. James Riley, the chief of emergency medicine, arrived for his Saturday morning rounds. He found Maya coordinating care for 18 patients while training 2 nursing students who looked like they might faint from the combination of stress and sensory overload. Nurse Rodriguez, Dr. Riley said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in emergency medicine. How long have you been here? 24 hours, sir? Dr. Riley surveyed the chaos patients in hallway beds, families camping out in the waiting room like refugees, overwhelmed staff running on fumes and prayer. His face darkened with the kind of anger that came from seeing preventable suffering. This is completely unacceptable. Within an hour, Dr. Riley had called in 3 off-duty nurses at double overtime rates and personally confronted Administrator Vaughn about the dangerous staffing levels. For the first time since this ordeal began, Maya realized that not all authority figures were her enemies. Some were potential allies in the fight for patient safety. But Vaughn's response made it clear that Maya's insubordination and troublemaking hadn't gone unnoticed. The battle lines were drawn, and Maya was about to discover just how dirty this fight could get. By hour 30, Maya's documentation had evolved from standard nursing notes into what could only be described as a detailed indictment of Metro General's practices. Patient wait times averaging 8 hours or more. Medication errors caused by physician fatigue and inadequate supervision. Equipment failures that hadn't been reported to state regulators. She had photographed the overcrowded conditions, recorded testimony from patients who had received substandard care, and maintained meticulous records of every safety violation she witnessed. Sarah Martinez arrived at the hospital around 2 p.m. on Saturday, carrying coffee and sandwiches like a relief worker bringing supplies to a disaster zone. She found Maya in a supply closet, sitting on a box of gauze with her head in her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, you need to come home," Sarah said softly, kneeling beside her girlfriend. "You're going to collapse. I can see it happening. I can't leave them, Sarah." Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Patterson in bed 14 hasn't seen a doctor in 7 hours because we only have 1 attending for the entire emergency department. Mrs. Chen's chest pain is getting worse, but we don't have enough staff to properly monitor her if I leave." Sarah, a civil rights attorney with a sharp legal mind, reviewed Maya's documentation with growing concern. "This is whistleblower territory, Maya. If you report this to state authorities, the hospital will retaliate. They'll destroy your career. And if I don't report it, patients will die." At hour 36, Maya's worst fears materialized in the form of a near-fatal medical error. Dr. Harrison, working his second consecutive 24-hour shift and swaying on his feet like a drunk person, accidentally prescribed heparin, a powerful blood thinner, to Maria Gonzalez, a 67-year-old stroke patient who should never receive anticoagulants because she had suffered a hemorrhagic stroke. Maya caught the error during medication reconciliation, but not before Harrison had already signed the order and the pharmacy had prepared the medication. "Doctor, Mrs. Gonzalez can't have heparin," Maya said calmly, though her heart was racing. "She had a hemorrhagic stroke. This medication could kill her." Harrison, his face pale with exhaustion and his eyes bloodshot, snapped at her with the desperation of someone who knew he'd made a potentially fatal mistake. "I know what I'm doing. Don't you dare question my medical judgment. You just prescribed a blood thinner for someone who's bleeding in their brain." Harrison stopped mid-sentence as the reality of his error hit him. His face went white as surgical gauze. The medication he had ordered could have caused Mrs. Gonzalez to bleed to death within hours. Maya quietly canceled the order and documented everything, but Harrison's humiliation and terror drove him straight to Administrator Vaughn's office with a complaint about Maya's hostile and insubordinate behavior toward physicians. At hour 40, Human Resources Director Carol Stevens summoned Maya to an empty conference room. Stevens was flanked by Vaughn, and a hospital attorney. Maya didn't recognize a thin man with dead eyes who looked like he specialized in destroying people's lives for corporate profit. "Miss Rodriguez, there have been serious complaints about your conduct during this extended shift," Stevens announced, with the kind of formal tone that meant careers were about to be ended. Maya, running on 40 hours of continuous work and pure adrenaline, had reached the point where diplomacy felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "My conduct? I've prevented 3 medication errors, caught 2 misdiagnoses, and probably saved at least 5 lives while this hospital systematically violates every patient safety regulation in existence. You've also been insubordinate to physicians, interfered with police investigations, and made unauthorized documentation of hospital operations." The attorney interjected with the smooth precision of someone who had done this many times before. "Unauthorized documentation? You mean accurate patient care records? Photographs of hospital conditions taken without permission. Recorded statements from patients that could be considered solicitation for future litigation." Maya realized with growing horror that they had been monitoring her activities. Someone had been watching, reporting back on her efforts to document unsafe conditions. "Are you firing me? We're placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation," Stevens announced, effective immediately. "You're removing me from patient care during a staffing crisis because I documented unsafe conditions that could kill people? We're protecting the hospital from potential legal liability," Vaughn said with cold calculation. Maya stood slowly, her legs shaking with exhaustion and rage. "Protecting the hospital, not the patients. Got it." But as Maya prepared to clean out her locker and leave, Dr. Chen burst into the conference room like an avenging angel. "We need Maya back on the floor immediately. We have a mass casualty situation." "She's on administrative leave?" Stevens began. "School bus versus semi-truck on I-94. 15 injured children en route, at least 6 critical. I have 2 residents, 1 attending physician, and 3 nurses to handle what's about to become a pediatric trauma disaster." Maya watched the hospital attorney whisper urgently with Stevens and Vaughn, calculating liability, the legal risk of keeping her on duty versus the catastrophic risk of inadequate patient care during a mass casualty event involving children. "Miss Rodriguez," Vaughn said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "we're temporarily suspending your administrative leave, but any further incidents will be properly documented," Maya interrupted, "just like this conversation." The next 6 hours were a blur of pediatric trauma that would haunt Maya's dreams for months afterward. She coordinated care for 7 critically injured children while their parents screamed, cried, and demanded answers that no one could provide. She started IVs on an 8-year-old with internal bleeding, assisted in an emergency chest tube insertion on a 12-year-old, and held the hand of a 16-year-old girl who kept asking if her friends were okay while Maya tried to stabilize her dangerously low blood pressure. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of pediatric surgery, arrived to take 3 children to emergency surgery. She watched Maya work anticipating needs, coordinating between multiple specialists, keeping families informed while providing life-saving care, and quietly took note. "How long has she been here?" Dr. Mitchell asked Dr. Chen during a brief pause in the chaos. 46 hours straight. That's impossible. She should be unconscious. Tell that to the kids she's keeping alive." During this crisis, even Dr. Harrison worked alongside Maya without conflict. Faced with genuine life-and-death situations, petty hierarchies and wounded egos faded into irrelevance. But Maya knew that once the crisis passed, the retaliation would resume with increased intensity. As the last critically injured child was stabilized and transferred to pediatric ICU, Maya finally allowed herself to sit down. It was 10 p.m. on Saturday night, exactly 48 hours since she was supposed to have gone home Friday evening. Her hands were trembling uncontrollably, her vision was blurring from exhaustion, and she had survived on coffee and vending machine granola bars for 2 days. Charge nurse Patricia approached her cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Maya, I know this is absolutely insane, but we're still short-staffed for the night shift. Could you possibly—" Maya looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering and too little sleep. "Patricia, I can't feel my feet. I started an IV on muscle memory alone an hour ago. I'm becoming a danger to these patients. But if you leave," Then maybe Administrator Vaughn will finally understand what happens when you don't staff a hospital properly. But even as she said it, Maya's eyes were drawn to bed 7, where Tommy Williams, Derek's 19-year-old brother, had just been brought in unconscious from a suspected fentanyl overdose. The system had already failed Derek once through police brutality and medical neglect. Maya couldn't let it fail Tommy too. She looked at the night shift, only 4 nurses, for a department that needed at least 8. The waiting room was filling up again with the usual Saturday night casualties, and somewhere in the hospital, Administrator Vaughn was probably calculating how to destroy her career while maximizing corporate profits. One more shift, Maya whispered to herself, but this is absolutely the last time. She had no idea that the most challenging part of her ordeal was still ahead of her. At hour 52, as Maya began what she promised herself was truly her final shift, investigator Janet Murphy from the Michigan Department of Health arrived unannounced at Metro General with a clipboard, a badge, and the kind of determined expression that struck fear into the hearts of hospital administrators everywhere. Someone had filed a formal complaint about unsafe staffing conditions and patient safety violations. Administrator Vaughn, his usual composure cracking like a dam under pressure, immediately cornered Maya in front of Dr. Chen and several other staff members. "I should have known you'd run crying to the state when things got difficult," he snarled, his expensive suit wrinkled from a sleepless night of damage control. "I didn't file any complaint," Maya said honestly, though her exhausted brain was working slowly. "But I should have." The truth, which none of them knew yet, was that Dr. Riley had filed the complaint after witnessing the dangerous conditions firsthand. But Vaughn's public accusation created immediate tension among the staff. Some supported Maya's advocacy for patient safety, while others worried about their jobs if the hospital faced state sanctions and potential closure. At hour 55, Maya's personal world cracked apart when Sarah called with devastating news. Abuela Rosa, Maya's 78-year-old grandmother who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident, had been admitted to St. Mary's Hospital across town with a massive heart attack. "She's asking for you," Sarah said through tears. "The doctors say." "Maya, you need to come. She might not make it through the night." Maya stared at her phone, then at the chaos surrounding her. Tommy Williams was stable but still unconscious from his overdose. 3 new trauma patients had just arrived from a domestic violence incident. The department was running on a skeleton crew, and she was the most experienced nurse on duty. "I can't leave." "Maya, she raised you. She might die tonight. People here will definitely die if I leave." The silence on the phone stretched until it became painful. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was cold, with a kind of pain that Maya had never heard before. "I can't do this anymore, Maya. You're so busy saving everyone else that you're losing everything that actually matters to you." The line went dead, leaving Maya staring at her phone in the middle of an emergency department that felt more like a war zone than a place of healing. At hour 60, Detective Robert Kane arrived to question Maya about Derek Williams' case. Officer Torres had filed a formal complaint, claiming that Maya had interfered with their investigation and provided false medical information to discredit their arrest report. "Officer Torres states that you coached the suspect on what symptoms to report," Detective Kane said, reviewing his notes with the methodical precision of someone who had conducted thousands of these interviews. "Officer Torres wouldn't recognize diabetic ketoacidosis if it came with a medical textbook and a PowerPoint presentation," Maya replied, pulling up Derek's chart on the computer. His blood glucose was over 400. He had ketones in his urine and 0 illegal substances in his system. Those are medical facts, not opinions. Detective Kane spent the next hour reviewing medical records, body camera footage from the arrest, and interviewing Derek, who was now fully conscious and coherent. Within 90 minutes, he was recommending that all charges against Derek be dropped and that Officer Torres face internal affairs review for excessive force. But Torres made it clear that Maya had made a permanent enemy in the police department. "You think you're some kind of hero, nurse? Just wait until you need us." On Sunday afternoon, at hour 61, Corporate Vice President Amanda Cross arrived from the hospital's parent company like a corporate terminator sent to eliminate problems. She was everything Vaughn aspired to be: polished, intimidating, armed with legal authority and unlimited corporate resources. Cross summoned Maya to a conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber, complete with hospital lawyers, HR representatives, and a stenographer whose presence suggested this was being recorded for future legal proceedings. "Ms. Rodriguez, you're facing serious allegations that could end your nursing career," Cross announced with the kind of calm precision that came from destroying people's lives for a living. "Insubordination, interference with medical practice, Unauthorized documentation, violation of patient confidentiality. Patient confidentiality? I advocated for patients who weren't receiving proper medical care. You photographed confidential medical information and shared it with outside parties. You solicited complaints from patients for potential litigation. Cross slid a document across the table like she was dealing a death card. This is a resignation letter. Sign it, and we'll provide positive references and a severance package equivalent to 6 months' salary. Refuse, and we'll terminate you for cause and ensure that you never work in healthcare again. Maya, running on 61 hours without sleep, her grandmother dying across town, her relationship destroyed, stared at the paper that represented everything she had worked for since graduating nursing school. Her career, her reputation, her ability to help patients all hanging in the balance because she had refused to let people die quietly while administrators counted profits. I need time to think. You have until the end of your shift. 3 hours. Sunday night brought Maya's ultimate test. At hour 67, Derek Williams returned to the ER, but this time he was carrying his unconscious 5-year-old daughter Destiny. She was burning with fever, barely breathing, and Derek was hysterical with the kind of terror that only parents understand. Please, he begged Maya. She's all I got. Don't let her die. Maya immediately began assessment while paging pediatrics. Destiny's symptoms, high fever, altered consciousness, neck stiffness, and a distinctive petechial rash screamed bacterial meningitis, a medical emergency that could kill within hours if not treated immediately. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric resident on call, arrived 20 minutes later. She had heard rumors about Maya being a troublemaker and was determined to establish her authority. I'll handle the patient, nurse. Just follow my orders. Dr. Walsh, trying to assert medical hierarchy while Maya had been working for over 67 hours, misread the clinical signs and started treatment for a simple viral infection. Doctor, we need to perform a lumbar puncture immediately, Maya said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. This presentation is classic for bacterial meningitis, the fever pattern, neck rigidity, and especially this petechial rash. It's viral meningitis. The fever curve is all wrong for bacterial infection. The rash says otherwise. And her level of consciousness is deteriorating. Are you attempting to diagnose my patient? Stay in your lane, nurse. Maya faced the ultimate choice of her career. Destiny Williams could die within hours if she didn't receive appropriate antibiotics. Maya could force the issue, call Dr. Chen, contact the attending on call, make a scene, but it would be the final act of insubordination that would destroy any chance of keeping her job. Or she could follow orders and potentially watch a 5-year-old die from medical negligence while her father begged for help. At hour 71, as Maya wrestled with this impossible decision, Dr. Elizabeth Thorne arrived unexpectedly. Dr. Thorne was a legend in pediatric medicine, 30 years of experience, published researcher, and someone whose medical judgment was considered unquestionable throughout the hospital. She took one look at Destiny Williams and immediately ordered antibiotics, steroids, and a lumbar puncture. Classic bacterial meningitis presentation, she announced. Textbook case. Who made the initial assessment? Dr. Walsh, realizing her potentially fatal mistake, tried desperately to save face. I was just about to order the same treatment protocol, but Derek Williams, holding his daughter's small hand while tears streamed down his face, spoke up clearly. It was her, he said, pointing to Maya. She knew right away what was wrong. She tried to tell the other doctor, but Dr. Thorne turned to Maya, taking in her exhausted appearance, her blood-stained scrubs, her hollow but somehow still alert eyes. Nurse Rodriguez, how long have you been working? 70. 1 hour straight, Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne's jaw literally dropped open. In 30 years of medicine, she had never encountered anything like this. 70? 1 hours? Continuously? Someone had to stay. Dr. Thorne looked around the emergency department at the understaffed chaos, at patients who had been waiting hours for basic care, at residents and nurses running on fumes while trying to keep people alive. She saw Dr. Walsh, who had almost misdiagnosed a child with a life-threatening condition. She saw the overcrowded conditions that violated every safety standard. And she saw Maya somehow still clinically sharp, still advocating for patients, still saving lives after working for 3 consecutive days without rest. Nurse Rodriguez, Dr. Thorne said quietly, her voice filled with something that sounded like awe. You just saved this child's life. After working for 71 hours straight, you're still the most competent healthcare provider in this room. As Maya entered her 72nd consecutive hour of work, several things happened simultaneously. Dr. Riley confronted Administrator Vaughn with the preliminary findings from the state investigation: multiple violations of patient safety regulations, unsafe staffing practices that endangered lives, and documented evidence of retaliation against employees who reported dangerous conditions. Detective Kane arrested Officer Torres for filing false police reports and excessive use of force against Derek Williams. Sarah arrived at the hospital, having learned that Abuela Rosa's condition had stabilized and that Maya had been working for 3 straight days. Her anger had transformed into something deeper, a realization that Maya's dedication to saving lives was exactly why she had fallen in love with her in the first place. Corporate VP Cross, facing a potential public relations nightmare if the media learned that the hospital had tried to fire a nurse who worked 72 hours straight to save lives, quietly shelved the resignation letter and began calculating damage control strategies. But the most important moment came when Dr. Thorne called an emergency meeting of the medical staff and hospital board of directors. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, she told the assembled group, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "and I have never seen anything like what I witnessed in that emergency department tonight." A nurse who has been working continuously for over 70 hours just correctly diagnosed bacterial meningitis that a rested resident missed completely. She has prevented medication errors, caught misdiagnoses, and literally kept this emergency department functioning through sheer force of will and clinical expertise. She turned to Maya, who was swaying on her feet but somehow still alert and focused. Maya Rodriguez represents everything that's right about nursing, and everything that's catastrophically wrong with our healthcare system. We've created conditions where heroes like her are necessary because we're too greedy and short-sighted to hire adequate staff. The room was completely silent. Then Dr. Thorne delivered her ultimatum. Either this hospital commits immediately to proper staffing levels and stops retaliating against healthcare workers who advocate for patient safety, or I'm resigning effective tomorrow morning and taking my entire surgical team to City General. And I'll make sure every medical journal, nursing publication, and news outlet in the country knows exactly why we're leaving. At hour 72, Maya Rodriguez finally went home. Maya's 72-hour shift ended not with fanfare, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every patient under her care had survived the night. As she finally walked to her car in the hospital parking lot, the morning sun painting Detroit in golden hues, she moved like someone who had been through a war and somehow emerged victorious. But the real battle was just beginning. 1 week later, the media storm. Channel 7 investigative reporter Mark Stevens broke the story on a slow Tuesday evening, and within hours, Maya's documentation had become the foundation for a news report that would change everything. The headline read, "Hero Nurse Works 72 Hours Straight. Hospital Administration Tries to Fire Her for Saving Lives." The story included Maya's photographs of overcrowded conditions, audio recordings of patients describing delayed care, and interviews with Derek Williams and his daughter Destiny, both of whom credited Maya with saving their lives. The report detailed every medication error she had prevented, every misdiagnosis she had caught, and every moment when her clinical expertise had meant the difference between life and death. Within 24 hours, Maya Rodriguez was trending nationally on social media. Nurses across the country shared their own stories of being forced to work in dangerous conditions. The American Nurses Association issued a statement calling Maya a hero who exemplifies the dedication and expertise of nurses everywhere. Medical professionals from coast to coast rallied to her support, sharing experiences of understaffing, administrative retaliation, and the impossible choices they faced daily. But the attention brought unexpected challenges. Maya received job offers from prestigious hospitals in Boston, Los Angeles, and Chicago. She also received death threats from people who accused her of seeking attention and threatening the natural order of medical hierarchy. The police union issued a statement supporting Officer Torres, claiming Maya had interfered with legitimate law enforcement activities. Some physicians publicly criticized the media coverage, arguing that it portrayed nurses as more competent than doctors. 1 month later, systemic changes. Maya's story became the catalyst for healthcare reform that advocates had been pushing for decades. State Senator Maria Vasquez introduced the Safe Patient Staffing Act, which would require hospitals to maintain specific nurse-to-patient ratios and prohibit retaliation against healthcare workers who reported unsafe conditions. The bill gained bipartisan support after families of patients who had received care during Maya's shift testified about the life-saving interventions she had provided. The American Nurses Association launched a national campaign for nurse recognition and improved working conditions, featuring Maya's story as the centerpiece. Medical schools began incorporating modules on nurse-physician collaboration and the critical value of nursing expertise in patient care. Metro General Hospital underwent a complete transformation. Under pressure from the state health department, media scrutiny, and Dr. Thorne's ultimatum, they hired 40 additional nurses, implemented comprehensive fatigue management protocols, and created a nurse-led patient safety committee with real authority to address dangerous conditions. Patient satisfaction scores improved dramatically, medical errors dropped by 60%, and staff turnover rates fell to the lowest levels in the hospital's history. Administrator Vaughn was quietly reassigned to a corporate position with no patient care responsibilities. Dr. Harrison completed additional training in clinical decision-making and medication safety. Officer Torres faced departmental discipline and mandatory retraining on medical emergencies and diabetic conditions. Personal resolution. Maya's relationship with Sarah not only survived the crisis but emerged stronger than before. The couple attended counseling to work through the trauma of those 72 hours and established clear boundaries between Maya's dedication to her profession and their personal life. "I fell in love with you because you care so deeply about helping people," Sarah told Maya during one of their sessions. "I just needed to understand that your calling to heal others doesn't mean you love me less." They moved in together officially, adopting a rescue dog named Hope, who had a particular talent for knowing when Maya needed comfort after difficult shifts. Derek Williams made a full recovery and enrolled in a comprehensive diabetes management program. His daughter Destiny showed no lasting effects from her bout with meningitis and started kindergarten that fall with a bright smile and boundless energy. The Williams family stayed in close contact with Maya, sending her pictures of Destiny's school plays, soccer games, and birthday parties. Abuela Rosa recovered completely from her heart attack and became Maya's biggest supporter, telling everyone at her senior center about her granddaughter, who works miracles and fights for people who can't fight for themselves. 6 months later, national impact. Maya testified before a congressional subcommittee on healthcare worker shortages and patient safety. Her calm, factual testimony about working conditions in American hospitals helped pass federal legislation requiring hospitals to publicly report staffing levels and patient safety metrics. "I didn't work 72 hours straight to become famous," she told the assembled congressmen and women. "I worked 72 hours straight because patients were dying, and someone had to stand in the gap between a broken system and the people it was supposed to serve." She founded a nonprofit organization called Nurses Speak Up, which provided legal support and advocacy for healthcare workers who faced retaliation for reporting unsafe conditions. The organization's hotline received over 3,000 calls in its first month, revealing the widespread nature of the problems Maya had documented. Dr. Elizabeth Thorne became chief of staff at Metro General and partnered with Maya to develop new protocols for nurse-physician collaboration. Their partnership became a model studied by healthcare systems nationwide, demonstrating how respect for nursing expertise could improve patient outcomes and reduce medical errors. 1 year later. Recognition and legacy. Maya received the American Nurses Association's highest honor for patient advocacy at their annual convention in Washington, D.C. In her acceptance speech, she said, "I didn't work 72 hours straight to be called a hero. Heroes are the nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers who show up every day in understaffed, under-resourced conditions and refuse to let their patients suffer. Heroes are the people who speak up when they see something wrong, even when they know they might face retaliation. We need to fix this broken system so that no healthcare worker ever has to choose between their own well-being and their patient's safety." The speech was viewed over 2 million times online and became a rallying cry for healthcare reform advocates. 5 years later, the lasting legacy. Maya Rodriguez is now Director of Nursing at Metro General, which has become one of the top-rated hospitals in Michigan for patient safety and staff satisfaction. She married Sarah in a small ceremony attended by colleagues, patients whose lives she had saved, and Abuela Rosa, who served as the maid of honor. The Maya Rodriguez Emergency Department features a plaque that reads, "Dedicated to all healthcare workers who put patients first, even when the system fails them." Derek Williams graduated from nursing school and works alongside Maya in the same emergency department where she saved his life. His daughter, Destiny, now 10 years old, has announced her intention to become a nurse, just like Miss Maya who saved my daddy and me. Dr. Thorne co-authored a medical textbook that includes a chapter titled The Rodriguez Case, When Nurses Lead Patient Safety. Tommy Williams, Derek's brother, has been sober for 4 years and works as a peer counselor for people struggling with addiction. The systemic changes Maya fought for have spread nationwide. Hospitals that maintain proper staffing levels and listened to frontline workers provide better patient care, have lower staff turnover, and actually save money by preventing medical errors and readmissions. The Safe Patient Staffing Act passed in 15 states and is under consideration in 12 others. The federal legislation Maya helped champion requires hospitals to publicly report nurse-to-patient ratios and has led to improved working conditions for healthcare workers across the country. The final message. Maya's story resonates because it represents thousands of healthcare workers who face similar conditions daily. Her 72-hour shift became a symbol of the dedication, skill, and moral courage that define the nursing profession, but also of the systemic failures that put both healthcare workers and patients at risk. The changes that followed her ordeal improved staffing, better working conditions, protection for whistleblowers, and recognition of nursing expertise prove that individual courage can drive systemic change when people are willing to stand up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost. In emergency departments across the country, Maya's story is told to new nurses as an example of what it means to truly advocate for patients. But more importantly, it's told as proof that the system can be changed when people refuse to accept that preventable suffering is inevitable. Today, no nurse at Metro General works more than 16 consecutive hours. Patient wait times have been cut in half. Medical errors are at historic lows. And in the supply closet where Maya once cried from exhaustion, there's now a small sign that reads, "You are not alone. Speak up. Your patients are counting on you." The story of Maya Rodriguez's 72-hour shift became more than just an inspirational tale. It became a roadmap for how individual courage, professional expertise, and moral clarity can transform broken systems and save lives. Because sometimes, heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes, they wear scrubs stained with the evidence of battles fought and won in the name of human dignity and the sacred trust between healers and those who need healing. Maya Rodriguez worked 72 hours straight, and in doing so, she changed everything.